Silas Morgan found her slumped against the assayer's office, her breath so faint he mistook it for wind, and her dress torn where killers had searched for the gold map sewn into its lining. The moment he cut through her bonds, he unknowingly signed his name to a death warrant that would either hang them both or lead them to a fortune that could topple an empire. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Under the merciless autumn sun of Colorado Territory, Silas Morgan rode with a slow, steady rhythm, dust lifting with every step of his dun mare. He had been tracking a wounded elk for half a day, the prints gone soft in the cracked earth. The silence out here was sacred, broken only by the faint creak of leather, the whine of wind through canyon walls, and the occasional call of a distant hawk. Silas liked it this way, alone, quiet, predictable. But then he heard it, so faint it might have been wind, a sound like a breath that had forgotten how to breathe. He froze in his saddle, head tilting, heart slowing. It came again, a whimper, weak and sharp like a thread about to snap. He dismounted quickly, tying the reins to a dead juniper limb. With his rifle slung over his back, he moved through the scraggly brush and boulders until he came upon the abandoned mining town of Holleridge, and there, collapsed against the weathered boards of what had once been the assayer's office, he saw her. She was slumped forward, arms limp at her sides, her body like a broken doll. Her skin was pale despite the sun, her long auburn hair matted with dirt and blood. Her chest rose in shallow, erratic breaths, but she was alive. Silas's eyes snapped to the crude wooden sign that had once proclaimed the building's purpose. The paint was faded, letters barely legible after years of neglect. The whole town seemed to have died around her, like she was the last heartbeat in a corpse. Christ, he muttered. What the hell happened to you? The woman stirred barely, her head lolled forward, and he saw the raw bruises on her neck, the torn fabric of her once fine dress. He swallowed hard. You hear me, miss? He asked, voice hoarse. No response. I am not here to hurt you, he said softer, almost to himself, as his boots crunched forward. He could see her face now, young, maybe 25, with a high brow and delicate features, her cheeks hollow from thirst. There was dried blood at her temple, crusted black against her pale skin. He reached for his canteen, uncorked it with his teeth. Gently, he tipped a few drops onto her cracked lips. She moaned, a sound somewhere between pain and desperate relief. Easy now, he whispered, pouring a little more. No, that's it. Her eyes fluttered open, green, he noticed, startlingly so against her dirt-streaked face, then closed again, but her hand clutched weakly at his sleeve. You got a name? He asked gently. Nothing. Well, I'm Silas Morgan, trapper, hunter, mostly keep to myself up in these parts. He was rambling now, trying to keep her conscious as he assessed her injuries. Gonna have to move you, miss. Can't leave you in this ghost town. Nothing here but bad memories and worse air. He stood, lifting her with effort, cradling her like something precious. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, light as autumn leaves. But for now, you're with me. And with that, Silas Morgan stepped back into the wilderness, carrying a woman who should have been dead and secrets that would soon prove heavy enough to bury them both. The sun was dipping low by the time Silas reached his cabin. Just a modest outpost clinging to the edges of a wilderness too stubborn to be tamed. A split-rail fence lined the small clearing, and the old barn sagged slightly under the weight of last winter's snow damage. The cabin itself was sturdier, one room and a loft, roof patched with hand-hewn shingles, but it stood solid against the coming night. Silas eased the woman from the saddle and carried her inside. She was feverish now, her head pressed to his chest, whispering breaths like dry leaves skittering across a stone floor. He laid her on his cot and unwrapped his coat from around her shoulders, careful not to startle her. The lantern flickered against the walls as he poured water into a metal basin and set it near her feet. He grabbed a clean cloth from a shelf and knelt. Her dress was torn in several places, the fabric once expensive, but now ruined. One ankle was swollen, and scrapes marred her arms like angry red rivers. I ain't gonna hurt you, he said, more to break the silence than expecting any reply. Just cleaning up a bit. He dipped the cloth into the water, and wrung it out. Then slowly, reverently, he began to wash the dirt and blood from her face. She flinched just barely. He paused, waited. When she did not pull away, he continued, his movements gentle, precise, like he was handling a wounded bird. The water turned rusty brown. He worked in silence, careful not to meet her gaze for too long, though he felt it on him whenever her eyes fluttered open, wary, confused, but no longer panicked. "Reckon you don't talk much," he muttered. Not unkindly. "That's all right. Silence is better than most things most days," he finished with her face, then carefully tended to the scrapes on her arm. She let him. When he was done, he wrapped her swollen ankle in soft cloth strips and set her foot gently on a folded blanket. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly, almost to himself. "My sister. Been gone 5 years now. Stubborn as a mule, but gentle too. Had eyes like yours, green as spring grass." He looked at her again, studying her features in the lamplight. High cheekbones, a small nose, lips cracked but still somehow soft. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache with something like memory. "I'll call you Elizabeth for now," he said. "Proper name for a proper lady. You look like you might have been one before. Whatever happened?" She blinked once, slowly. No protest, no nod, just breath. Silas stood, hands wet, and reached for another blanket to cover her. He tucked it around her shoulders, then stepped back. "If you're hungry, there's stew. Not fancy, but better than nothing." Still no answer. He grabbed his bedroll and dragged it toward the door. He would sleep in the barn tonight, give her space. It wasn't right for her to be watched by a stranger, especially not one rough-hewn as himself. Before he stepped outside, he looked back one last time. She had shifted slightly, eyes closed, lips no longer trembling. The basin still sat beside the cot, tinged with the evidence of her ordeal. He picked it up and emptied it outside, watching the water soak into the thirsty ground. That night, she dreamed of gunshots, of running, of hands that grabbed and hurt, but also of other hands, rough but gentle, washing the pain away without asking anything in return. The days that followed passed with the slow rhythm of mountain life, but the silence inside the cabin was different now, thicker, charged with unspoken questions. Elizabeth, as Silas still called her, ate when he brought food, though never much. She moved with caution, eyes always alert, posture tense like an animal who had been caged too long. She never spoke, but he caught her watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. At night, Silas left her the cot and took to the barn, his rifle beside him. He pretended it was to give her space, but the truth was more complicated. He was afraid, not of her, but of what her presence might bring. It was on the 3rd morning when he first saw them, bootprints, slightly smaller than his own, fresher than his, and angled toward the cabin from the eastern ridge. Silas squatted beside them in the soft earth and studied the heel, expensive leather, city-made. The print was fresh, no more than a few hours old. He rose slowly, eyes scanning the tree line, nothing but pine shadows and morning mist. Back inside, Elizabeth sat by the window, still and silent. She did not look at him when he entered, but her body tensed. "You seen anyone?" he asked. She said nothing, only pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I think we've got company," Silas murmured, more to himself than to her. That evening, he kept the lantern low and stayed by the doorway, rifle across his knees. The wind had died. Coyotes howled far off, and the stars blinked into view like cautious witnesses. Elizabeth did not sleep. He could hear her moving inside, pacing the floor in slow circles. It was around midnight when she finally spoke. "They'll kill you too," she whispered, her voice like rustling leaves after so many days of silence. "Just for helping me." Silas froze at the sound of her voice, rich and cultured despite its weakness. He turned slowly, finding her standing in the shadows, one hand braced against the rough-hewn wall. "So you can speak," he said, keeping his voice even. She stepped forward, the moonlight from the small window casting her face in silver. "Yes, I can speak." Her fingers clutched at the blanket around her shoulders. "And I'm telling you they're coming." "Who's coming?" Silas asked, rising to his feet, rifle still in hand. "Men who want what I have." Her eyes darted to the window, then back to him. "Men who killed everyone else to get it." Silas took a deep breath. "And what exactly do you have that's worth killing for?" For a long moment, she said nothing, seeming to weigh her options, to measure his trustworthiness. Then she stepped closer, My name is Constance Whitfield, she said, the name falling from her lips like something precious and dangerous. My father was Judge Edward Whitfield of Boston. She paused, watching his face for recognition. Silas shook his head. Name means nothing to me, miss. A flash of relief crossed her features. My father, he made powerful enemies, men in the mining business. They framed him for corruption, had him arrested. Her voice caught. Before they took him, he gave me something to hide. Something they want badly enough to follow me across the country. What is it? Silas asked. His curiosity piqued, despite his better judgment. Constance glanced toward the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. A map, she whispered, to a gold mine. Not just any gold. The richest vein in Colorado Territory. My father discovered it through legal documents in a case he was overseeing. The mine was thought to be dry, but it's not. There's a hidden shaft, untouched. Silas narrowed his eyes. If that's true, why come west yourself? Why not send it with someone else? Because I'm the only one my father trusted. Her chin lifted slightly, pride mingling with grief. And because I have to clear his name. The map is evidence. It proves the mining company falsified reports, bribed officials. And where is this map now? Her hand went to the torn bodice of her dress. Hidden, sewn into the lining. She gave a small, mirthless laugh. They searched me, but they didn't think to check the stitching. Silas rubbed his beard thoughtfully. These men who are after you, how many? 3 that I've seen. Led by a man named Blackwood. Augustus Blackwood. The name came out like poison. He's ruthless. He killed the stagecoach driver, the other passengers. I only escaped because the coach crashed. I ran while they were still dazed. That how you got hurt? She nodded. The crash. And then she swallowed hard. 3 days hiding, running. I found that ghost town and thought I might hide in one of the buildings, but I was too weak by then. Silas moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. If what you're saying is true, we need to leave at first light. This cabin won't hold against determined men with guns. You believe me? She asked, surprise evident in her voice. He turned back to her, his weathered face solemn in the dim light. I believe someone tried to kill you. I believe you're scared. The rest, he shrugged, doesn't much matter. I'm not in the habit of letting people die on my watch. For the first time, her face softened. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Silas, he corrected. Get some rest. Dawn comes early. She hesitated, then moved back toward the cot. Where are we going? I know a place. Old Trapper's cabin deeper in the mountains, not on any maps. We'll be safe there while we figure out our next move. Constance nodded, but her eyes remained troubled. As she settled back onto the cot, she asked quietly, have you ever killed a man, Silas? The question hung in the air like gunsmoke. Yes, he answered simply. When I had to. She closed her eyes. Good, she whispered, because they won't show mercy. The night passed in tense silence, both of them drifting in and out of uneasy sleep. Silas kept his rifle close, ears straining for any sound beyond the natural rhythm of the forest. By the time the first grey light of dawn crept through the windows, they were both already up and preparing. Silas packed only essentials: food, ammunition, medical supplies. Constance had little to take, only the tattered dress she wore. Silas handed her a worn flannel shirt and canvas trousers. They'll be too big, but better for riding than that dress. She accepted them without complaint and changed behind a blanket he hung for privacy. When she emerged, the clothes hung on her frame, but she had cinched the pants with a piece of rope and rolled the sleeves. Despite the rough attire, she moved with a natural grace that spoke of her upbringing. We'll take both horses, Silas said, checking his saddlebags one last time. Ride hard for the first few hours, then cut through the creek to hide our trail. As they stepped outside into the cool morning air, Constance paused, looking back at the cabin. I've brought danger to your door, she said softly. I'm sorry for that. Silas tightened the saddle straps. Danger finds its way to most doors eventually, he replied. I'd be better to meet it standing than hiding. They mounted up, Constance a bit unsteady, but determined. Silas noted with approval that she knew how to ride, not like a city woman out for a park stroll, but with genuine skill. My father believed women should know how to handle themselves, she explained. Seeing his expression, he taught me to ride and shoot from the time I was small. Can you still shoot? Silas asked, handing her a small revolver from his saddlebag. She took it, checking the chamber with practiced ease. Yes, though I pray I won't need to. Amen to that, Silas murmured, and they set off, riding west into the rising sun. They rode hard for 3 hours, pushing through dense forest and across rocky plateaus. Silas set a demanding pace, but Constance kept up without complaint, though he could see the pain etched in the tight line of her mouth. Her injuries were far from healed. When they finally stopped at a small creek to water the horses, Silas studied her with concern. "How are you holding up?" She straightened in the saddle, pride overriding discomfort. "I'm fine." He almost smiled at the stubborn set of her jaw. "We'll rest here for a bit. Eat something." They dismounted, and Silas helped her down, feeling her wince as her injured ankle took weight. He pretended not to notice, knowing instinctively that her dignity mattered to her. As they shared dried venison and hard biscuits, Constance looked around at the towering pines and distant mountain peak. "It's beautiful here," she said unexpectedly. "Savage, but beautiful." Silas followed her gaze. "Most beautiful things have teeth," he replied. She studied him then, really looked at him perhaps for the first time. "How long have you been alone out here, Silas?" The question caught him off guard. 5 years. Since the war ended. "The war changed many men," she observed. "It did." He offered nothing more, and she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Do you think we've lost them?" Silas scanned the terrain behind them. For now, maybe. But men like you described, they don't give up easy, especially not with gold at stake." "It's not just the gold," Constance said quietly. "It's what the map represents. Proof of corruption at the highest levels. Names, dates, transactions, all documented in my father's hand along the borders." Silas's eyebrows rose. "That's why they want it so bad. Not just riches, but keeping their crimes buried." She nodded grimly. "The map is worthless without the code to read it properly. My father was clever that way." "And you know this code?" "Yes, it's..." She stopped suddenly, head tilting. "Did you hear that?" Silas was already on his feet, rifle raised. In the distance, the faint but unmistakable sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. "Mount up," he said tersely. "They've found our trail." They rode hard, pushing deeper into the wilderness where the terrain grew increasingly rugged. Silas led them through narrow passes and dense thickets, places where horses struggled, but men on foot would find it nearly impossible to follow. The autumn sun climbed high, then began its descent, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Constance kept pace, though Silas could see the toll it was taking. Her face had grown pale, her lips pressed into a thin line against the pain. Still, she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. There was steel in her that he hadn't expected from a judge's daughter. When they finally reached the creek he'd been aiming for, Silas held up his hand. "We follow the water from here, leave no tracks." They dismounted, leading the horses into the shallow, rocky streambed. The cold water rushed around their boots as they waded upstream, the horses snorting in protest, but following obediently. "How much farther?" Constance asked, her voice tight with exhaustion. 2 miles, maybe less," Silas replied, glancing back at her. "You holding up?" She nodded, though her steps had become uneven, favoring her injured ankle. "I'll manage," they continued in silence, the only sounds the rush of water and the occasional call of a raven overhead. After nearly an hour of slow progress, Silas led them out of the creek and onto a barely visible game trail that wound up a steep hillside. The path was treacherous, loose shale and exposed roots threatened to trip them with every step. Halfway up, Constance stumbled, a small cry escaping her lips as her ankle gave way. Silas was at her side instantly, strong arm supporting her weight. "I'm fine," she insisted, trying to pull away. "You're not," he countered, his voice gruff but not unkind. "But we're almost there. Lean on me." Pride warred with necessity on her face, but after a moment she relented, allowing him to help her up the remaining distance. At the crest of the hill, nestled among ancient pines, stood a small cabin built of rough-hewn logs, nearly invisible against the surrounding forest. "Not much to look at," Silas said as they approached, "but it's solid. Built it myself when I first came to these mountains." "It's perfect," Constance breathed, relief evident in her voice. Inside, the cabin was spare but neat. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a small table and 2 chairs sat in the center, and a narrow cot occupied the corner. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a collection of traps and tools lined the opposite wall. It smelled of pine resin and wood smoke. "You rest," Silas said, helping her to the cot. "I'll tend the horses and get a fire going." By the time he returned, Constance had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her face finally relaxed. Vulnerable in a way it hadn't been while she was awake. Silas built a fire, its warm light chasing away the growing shadow. He moved quietly, preparing a simple stew from dried meat and the few wild onions he'd gathered along their journey. The smell eventually roused her. She sat up slowly, wincing as she swung her legs over the side of the cot. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, voice husky with rest. "Couple hours. Sun's nearly down." He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and brought it to her. "Eat. You need your strength." She accepted it gratefully, the first few bites hesitant before hunger took over. They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. "Will they find us here?" she finally asked, setting aside her empty bowl. Silas considered the question carefully, not easily. "This place isn't on any map, and I've been careful over the years, but men like the ones after you," he sighed, "they're persistent." "They won't stop until they have the map," Constance agreed, her hand unconsciously moving to her dress. "Maybe it's time you showed it to me," Silas suggested. If I'm risking my neck for it, might be good to know what I'm protecting." She hesitated, studying his face in the firelight. Whatever she was looking for, she must have found it, because she nodded slowly. "Help me with the stitching," she said, turning slightly to expose the side seam of her tattered dress bodice. Silas moved closer, pulling out a small knife from his belt. With surprising delicacy for such large hands, he carefully cut the tiny stitches that ran along the inner lining. After a moment, he felt something thin and stiff between the layers of fabric. "There," Constance directed, her breath warm against his cheek as he worked. Slowly, he extracted a folded piece of parchment, yellow with age and worn at the creases. He handed it to her without opening it, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed. Constance took a deep breath, then carefully unfolded the map on the table between them. In the flickering firelight, they both leaned forward to examine it. The map was beautifully drawn, showing a detailed section of mountain terrain with elevation lines and natural landmarks. Various notations were written in a precise hand along the borders. Names, date, figures that meant nothing to Silas. Near the center, a small X marked what he presumed was the mine entrance, but it was surrounded by what appeared to be random numbers and symbols. "This is it?" he asked, somewhat underwhelmed. "This is it," she confirmed, "though it's not as straightforward as it appears." Her finger traced a series of numbers along the eastern edge. "These are the real coordinates, but they're encoded. And these," she pointed to symbols scattered across the map, "are markers for the true entrance. The X is a decoy." Silas's brow furrowed. "Your father was a cautious man. He had to be. The men he was investigating had already killed once to protect their interests." Her voice grew tight. "A witness who was willing to testify. They made it look like an accident." Silas studied the map more closely. "I know this terrain," he said slowly. "This ridge here," he tapped a line on the western edge. "That's Eagle's Peak, and this river must be the Silver Stone." Constance looked at him with surprise. "You can read it, parts of it, enough to know it's about 3 days' ride from here." He straightened, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. "What's your plan once you have the gold?" "I don't care about the gold," she said fiercely. "I want the evidence." These notations, she indicated the border writings. They detail bribes, falsified reports, the names of officials who were paid off. "With this, I can clear my father's name and bring Blackwood and his associates to justice." "Justice," Silas repeated, the words sounding hollow. "Been my experience that justice is a luxury most can't afford." "Perhaps," Constance conceded, "but I have to try. My father is dying in prison for crimes he didn't commit, while those responsible grow richer by the day." The passion in her voice stirred something in Silas, something he thought had died years ago in the blood-soaked fields of Virginia, a belief that maybe, sometime, things could be set right. "We should sleep," he said finally, carefully refolding the map. "Tomorrow we'll need to prepare. If we're going to that mine, We'll need supplies. Constance took the map back, her fingers brushing his. Thank you, Silas, for believing me, for helping when you have no reason to. He turned away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Take the cot. I'll sleep by the fire. As he laid out his bedroll on the floor, Constance asked quietly, why are you doing this? Really? Silas stared into the flames, memories flickering through his mind, of war, of loss, of a man he'd once been. Maybe I'm tired of just surviving, he said finally. Maybe I want to do something that matters again. The confession hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. But in the quiet sanctuary of the cabin, with danger waiting beyond its walls, the truth seemed less threatening than it might have in the light of day. That night, as the fire burned low and Constance's breathing deepened with sleep, Silas remained awake, rifle across his knees, listening to the whispers of the forest. He had promised her safety, and he meant to keep that promise, even if it meant confronting ghosts he'd spent 5 years trying to outrun. Dawn arrived with a mist that clung to the pines like ghostly fingers. Silas was already up, stoking the fire and setting water to boil for coffee. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to solitude, each motion practiced and precise. Constance stirred on the cot, her eyes opening to the unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face before memory returned, bringing with it the weight of her circumstances. Morning, Silas said, not turning from his task. Oh, coffee'll be ready soon. She sat up slowly, wincing as her body protested the previous day's exertion. Thank you. While the coffee brewed, Silas pulled out a worn leather satchel from beneath a loose floorboard. Inside were cartridges, a compass, flint, and a small canvas pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. Emergency supplies, he explained, catching her curious gaze. You never know when you might need to run. You've been running a long time, Constance observed quietly, his hands stilled for a moment. Yes, she didn't press further, respecting the boundaries of his past just as he had respected hers. Instead, she accepted the steaming cup he offered, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. We need to talk about what happens next, Silas said, settling into the chair across from her. Those men, they'll keep searching. The question is whether we wait them out or make a move. Constance sipped her coffee, considering. My father's trial is set for 3 weeks from now. If I'm not back in Denver with this evidence by then, she didn't need to finish. They both knew what was at stake. 3 weeks, Silas repeated, calculating. That's tight, but possible. We'd need to reach the mine, document what's there, then make it to Denver. He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. The journey alone would take nearly 2 weeks in good weather, and it's not good weather coming, Constance added, noting the grey skies visible through the small window. October in the Rockies. Snow comes early up here, Silas agreed. First blizzard could hit any day. They fell silent, the magnitude of the challenge settling between them like a physical presence. Finally, Constance set down her cup with determination. I have to try. My father sacrificed everything to expose this corruption. I won't let him die in prison. Silas studied her face, the resolute set of her jaw, the fire in her green eyes. She was either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman he'd ever encountered. Perhaps both. All right, he said at last. We leave tomorrow at first light. Today, we prepare. The day passed in methodical preparation. Silas hunted, returning with 2 rabbits that he skinned and prepared for jerky. Constance mended her dress with needle and thread from Silas's sparse supplies, strengthening the seams for hard travel. They worked mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the rhythmic tasks creating a strange sense of normalcy in their extraordinary situation. As evening approached, Silas spread the map on the table again, weighing its corners with small stones. He traced potential routes with a calloused finger, muttering calculations under his breath. There's a shorter path here, he said, indicating a narrow pass between 2 peaks. Oh, but it's treacherous this time of year. One early snow and we'd be trapped. What's the alternative? Constance asked, leaning over his shoulder to see. Longer route through the valley, adds 3 days, but safer. We don't have 3 days to spare, she reminded him. Silas frowned. Rushing into those mountains when winter's coming is asking for trouble. My father doesn't have the luxury of caution, Silas. Her voice was quiet but firm. Neither do we. Their eyes met over the map. a silent battle of will. After a long moment, Silas nodded reluctantly. The pass it is, but we follow my lead. No arguments. One wrong step up there could be your last. Agreed, she said, relieved. Then more softly, thank you. He shrugged off her gratitude, uncomfortable with it. Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive it. Later, as they ate a simple meal of rabbit stew, Constance broke their companionable silence. Tell me about yourself, Silas Morgan. A man doesn't become a hermit in the wilderness without a story. He stiffened slightly, spoon pausing halfway to his mouth. Not much to tell. I think there is, she persisted gently. You're educated. I can tell by how you speak when you forget to hide it. You know these mountains better than most guides, and you handle a rifle like a soldier. Silas set down his bowl, regarding her with a mixture of wariness and reluctant respect. You're observant. My father taught me to notice detail. She smiled slightly. It served me well, he sighed, knowing she wouldn't relent. I was a captain in the Union Army, 18th Colorado Volunteers. After the war, I came west. That's the outline, Constance said. What's the story? Silas was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep and painful. I led men into battle at Sand Creek. You ever heard of it? Constance shook her head. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. His eyes fixed on something beyond the cabin walls. Cheyenne and Arapaho, mostly women and children. They'd been promised peace if they camped there. We were told they were hostile. The horror of understanding dawned on Constance's face. Oh, Silas, I didn't fire on them, he continued, voice hollow. Ordered my men not to, but it didn't matter. Colonel Chivington wanted blood. Over 100 dead by sunrise. He looked down at his hands, strong hands that had built this cabin, skinned game, carried her to safety, hands that had failed to stop a slaughter. After that, I couldn't go back, couldn't face civilization, so I came here. Been here ever since. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unvarnished. You tried to stop it, Constance said finally. That counts for something, does it? Silas's laugh was bitter. Tell that to the dead. Is that why you helped me? She asked softly. Atonement. His eyes met hers, unexpectedly vulnerable. Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of standing by while injustice happens. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. The touch was startling in its simplicity, in the comfort it offered without demands. And we can't change the past, she said, but what we do now, that still matters. Something shifted in Silas's expression, a softening around the eyes that transformed his weathered face. For a brief moment, she glimpsed the man he might have been before war and guilt had carved their paths into his soul. The moment was broken by a sound outside, subtle, but unmistakable to Silas's trained ear, the snap of a twig beneath a careful foot. He was on his feet instantly, extinguishing the lantern with one quick movement, plunging the cabin into darkness, save for the low glow of the fire. His finger pressed against his lips in warning as he reached for his rifle. Constance froze, eyes wide with fear. The cozy intimacy of moments before evaporated like morning mist, replaced by the sharp edge of danger. Silas moved to the window, keeping to the shadows as he peered into the gathering dusk. Nothing moved among the trees, but his instincts screamed a warning. 5 years in the wilderness had taught him to trust those instincts. Get your things, he whispered, returning to Constance's side. Now, without question, she gathered the map and what few possessions she had, moving with quiet urgency. There's a trapdoor beneath the rug, Silas instructed, his voice barely audible. Root cellar. It leads to a tunnel that comes out 50 yards downstream. Take the map and go. I'll follow. I won't leave you, she protested. This isn't a debate, he growled. Go, now. The determination in his eyes brooked no argument. With reluctance, Constance slipped through the trapdoor, disappearing into the darkness below. Silas took position by the window, rifle ready, listening to the night. Whoever was out there was good, patient, careful, but not good enough. Not for a man who had spent 5 years becoming part of these mountains. And as he waited in the shadows, Silas Morgan made a silent promise to the woman who had awakened something he thought long dead within him. She would reach Denver. She would save her father, even if it cost him everything. The tunnel was narrow and damp, forcing Constance to crouch as she made her way through the darkness. Earth and stone pressed in from all sides, the air thick with the scent of wet soil and decaying leaves. Her fingers traced the rough-hewn walls, guiding her forward when her eyes failed her. Behind, she heard nothing. No gunshot, no shouts, no signs of pursuit, just silence, which somehow terrified her more than noise would have. After what felt like an eternity, her hands found wooden slats forming a crude ladder. She climbed carefully, pushing against a trapdoor above her head. It gave way with surprising ease, revealing a star-filled sky through a camouflage of brush and fallen branches. Constance emerged into a small clearing beside the creek, exactly where Silas had said she would. The night air felt shockingly fresh after the confines of the tunnel. She crouched among the shadows, waiting, listening, the map clutched tightly to her chest. Minutes stretched into an agonizing half-hour. No sign of Silas, no indication of what might have transpired back at the cabin. Just as panic began to claw at her throat, a rustling came from the underbrush to her left. She tensed, hand moving to the small revolver Silas had given her. "It's me," came his hushed voice, and relief flooded through her as his familiar silhouette materialized from the darkness. "What happened?" she whispered as he knelt beside her. "Two men, scouts from the look of them, not Blackwood himself. Did they see you?" Silas shook his head. "No, they were checking the cabin. I slipped out while they were circling around back." His expression was grim in the faint moonlight. "They'll know someone's been there, though. Fresh ashes in the fireplace. Food scrap, so they'll keep looking." "Yes, and they'll alert Blackwood." He surveyed their surroundings, mind already calculating their next move. "We need to move fast, gain some distance before dawn." The horses had to leave them. They're hobbled in the clearing. Maybe the men won't find them right away, but we can't risk going back. Constance nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. Without horses, the journey would be longer, harder, but they had no choice. "Would you have supplies?" Silas added, patting the pack slung across his shoulder. "Enough for a few days. We'll have to travel light and fast." They set off through the wilderness, guided only by starlight and Silas's intimate knowledge of the terrain. He set a punishing pace, pushing them through dense underbrush and across rocky streams. Constance struggled to keep up, her ankle throbbing with renewed pain, but she refused to slow them down. Dawn found them high on a forested ridge, miles from the cabin. Silas finally called a halt, allowing them to rest in the shelter of a fallen pine. Constance sank gratefully to the ground, leg extended, too exhausted even for speech. Silas handed her the canteen. "Small sips," he cautioned. "We need to conserve water until we reach the next stream." She nodded, drinking just enough to ease her parched throat. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed, the simple contact oddly reassuring in their dire circumstances. "Let me see your ankle," Silas said, kneeling beside her. Constance pulled up her pant leg, revealing the swollen joint now mottled with purple and yellow bruising. Silas examined it with gentle fingers, his touch clinical but careful. "It's not broken," he concluded, "but you've strained it again. We'll need to bind it tighter." He tore a strip from his own shirt, wrapping the ankle with practiced efficiency. As he worked, Constance studied his face, the deep lines etched around his eyes, the scar that ran along his jawline, the silver threading through his dark beard, a face weathered by hardship, yet somehow trustworthy. "Thank you," she said softly when he finished. He grunted in acknowledgement, uncomfortable with gratitude as always. "We'll rest for an hour, then push on. Need to put more distance between us and them." "How far to the mine?" Silas considered, calculating. "On foot, 3 days if we're lucky. Longer with your ankle." Constance bit her lip, doing the math. Even if they reached the mine within 4 days, documented what they found, and somehow acquired horses for the return journey, they'd barely make it to Denver in time for her father's trial. As if reading her thoughts, Silas added, "There's a trading post about a day and a half from here. If we can reach it, we might secure horses." Hope flickered in her chest. "Do you know the proprietor?" "Old Jim Burke. Known him for years. He's fair, keeps to himself. Will he help us? Silas's expression turned guarded for the right price. Jim doesn't ask questions, but he doesn't do favors either. They rested in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Constance pulled out the map, studying it in the soft morning light. The markings seemed to shift and dance before her tired eyes, the code her father had taught her blurring at the edges of her consciousness. "I've been thinking," Silas said suddenly. "Those men back at the cabin, they weren't just passing by. They knew to look there." Constance looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they're tracking us too well. First my main cabin, then the shelter, places no one should know about. Could they have followed our trail? You said yourself they're persistent." Silas shook his head. "We covered our tracks too carefully." "No, they knew where to look." His eyes met hers, serious and searching. "Is there anything you haven't told me? Anything that might explain how they're finding us?" Constance bristled at the implication. "You think I'm leading them to us? Why would I do that when they're trying to kill me? Not intentionally," he clarified, "but something you're carrying, something you might not even realize." Understanding dawned on her face. "The dress. My clothes from Boston." She reached for the bundle she'd been carrying, her original dress, now mended but still stained with dirt and blood. They could have placed something. Together, they examined the garment inch by inch, checking every seam, every fold. Near the hem, almost invisible among the intricate embroidery, Silas's fingers found a small metal disc no larger than a dime. "What is it?" Constance asked, peering closer. "Tracker's mark," Silas replied grimly. "Old army trick. They're magnetized. A compass held nearby will point to it instead of north. Lets a skilled tracker follow someone for miles, even when the trail's gone cold." Horror spread across Constance's face. "All this time, they've been following this. Likely." Silas took the disc and hurled it far into the forest. They'll lose the signal now, but they already know we're in this general area. So we keep running," Constance said, resignation in her voice. "No," Silas's tone was resolute. "We changed tactics. They're expecting us to head for the mine. It's where the map leads, after all. So instead, we go to the trading post first, resupply, then circle back to the mine from an unexpected direction. Will that work? It might buy us time. And right now, time is what we need most." They continued their journey as the sun climbed higher, following game trails through dense forest. Silas moved with the natural stealth of a hunter, while Constance did her best to imitate his careful footsteps despite her injury. By midday, they had descended into a narrow valley where a clear stream gurgled over smooth stones. Silas called another brief halt, allowing them to refill the canteen and cool their aching feet in the cold water. As Constance sat on the bank, she caught Silas watching her with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" she asked. He seemed to hesitate, then said, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone softer. Someone who would have given up by now." A small smile played at her lips. "Disappointed." "No," he answered, something like admiration warming his voice. "Surprised." The moment was interrupted by a distant sound, so faint it might have been imagination, but Silas's head snapped up, body instantly alert. "What?" Constance whispered, alarmed by his reaction. "Dog," he said tersely. "Hunting dog." Fear clutched at her heart. "How far?" "Mile, maybe less." "Wind's carrying the sound." He was already on his feet, gathering their meager supplies. "They've brought trackers. Good ones. Can we outrun them?" Silas's expression was grim. "Not on foot. Not with your ankle. We need to outsmart them." He scanned their surroundings, mind racing through possibilities. Then his gaze settled on the stream, flowing swift and cold from the mountains. "Water leaves no scent," he said, more to himself than to her. "Come on." Without waiting for a response, he pulled her to her feet and led her into the stream. The cold was shocking, the current stronger than it appeared, but Constance bit back any complaint as they began to wade upstream. "Stay in the water," Silas instructed. "Step only on stone, not mud. Leave no prints." They moved as quickly as the slippery rocks and rushing water would allow, fighting against the current that seemed determined to sweep them off their feet. Constance's injured ankle screamed in protest, but she pushed through the pain, understanding that their lives depended on this desperate gambit. Behind them, The baying of hounds grew louder, more excited. The hunters had found their trail. For nearly an hour, they fought against the current, moving upstream through water that grew progressively colder as they climbed higher into the mountains. Constance's legs had gone numb, her hands blue with cold as she clutched at Silas's arm for support. Each step required focused determination, her body threatening to betray her with every passing minute. The baying of the hounds had faded somewhat, but not disappeared. The dogs were confused, having lost the scent at the stream, but their handlers were experienced. They would split up, some following the stream in both directions, while others continued on the original trajectory. Just a little farther, Silas encouraged, his own voice tight with exertion. Ahead, the stream narrowed and quickened, cascading down a series of small falls, impossible to climb while staying in the water. "Here," Silas said, guiding her toward the eastern bank where a massive fallen tree created a natural bridge across the stream. "We'll cross to those rocks. The granite won't hold scent." They dragged themselves from the water, limbs heavy and uncooperative from cold. Constance nearly collapsed as she put weight on her injured ankle, but Silas caught her, strong arm around her waist. "Lean on me," he instructed, and she did, grateful for his solid presence. Together they crossed the log bridge, then picked their way across a field of granite boulders that stretched upward toward a tree-lined ridge. Each step was agony for Constance, but she bit her lip against the pain, refusing to slow their escape. When they finally reached the shelter of the pines at the ridgetop, Silas allowed them to rest briefly. Constance sank to the ground, hands trembling as she tried to massage, feeling back into her frozen feet. "The dogs will have more trouble in this pine forest," Silas explained, keeping his voice low. "Too many scents. Needles on the ground retain less smell." "What about the men?" Constance asked through chattering teeth. "Smart ones. They'll head for high ground, try to spot us from a distance." His gaze swept the terrain they'd just crossed. But we've left no trail on those rocks. Should buy us some time." He dug through his pack, producing a small flask. "Whiskey," he explained, offering it to her. "Just a sip. It'll warm you from inside." Constance accepted gratefully, the liquor burning a fiery path down her throat and into her stomach. The warmth spread slowly through her limbs, a blessed relief from the bone-deep cold. Silas took a swig himself, then recorked the flask. "We need to keep moving. Trading post is still a day's journey. Do you think we'll make it before they find us again?" His expression was somber. "I think we have to try." They continued through the pine forest, moving more quickly now on the cushion of needles underfoot. Silas set a course that kept them just below the ridgeline, high enough to make progress, low enough to stay hidden from any watchers on neighboring peaks. As the afternoon waned, the terrain changed, becoming steeper and more treacherous. Rocky outcroppings jutted from the mountainside like broken teeth, forcing them to pick their path carefully. "Watch your step here," Silas warned as they navigated a particularly narrow ledge. "Long way down." Constance kept her eyes fixed forward, refusing to look at the drop that yawned beside them. One misstep, one loose stone, and the fall would kill them as surely as Blackwood's bullets. They had nearly cleared the worst section when disaster struck. A rock shifted beneath Constance's foot, throwing her off balance. She lurched sideways, a cry escaping her lips as she began to fall toward the abyss. In an instant, Silas's hand shot out, catching her wrist in an iron grip. For one heart-stopping moment, she dangled over the edge, staring up into his face, her life literally in his hands. With a grunt of effort, he hauled her back to safety, pulling her against his chest, where she could feel his heart hammering as rapidly as her own. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair, arms tight around her. "I've got you." They stayed like that for several long moments, neither willing to break the embrace that somehow meant more than just physical safety. When they finally separated, something had changed between them. A barrier crossed, a truth acknowledged without word. As daylight began to fade, Silas found them shelter in a small cave formed by a rock overhang. It wasn't deep, but it offered protection from the wind that had begun to gust down from the higher peaks, carrying with it the first bite of winter. "No fire tonight," he said apologetically. "Too risky." Constance nodded, huddling deeper into the coat he had insisted she wear. "I understand." They shared a meager supper of jerky and dried berries, conserving their limited supplies. The temperature dropped rapidly with the sun, the mountain night asserting its cruel dominion over the day's warmth. "We should sleep close," Silas suggested, practical rather than presumptuous. "Share body heat." "Yes," Constance agreed simply. They arranged themselves in the shallow cave, Silas's back against the rock wall, Constance tucked against him, his arms encircling her. His body was solid and warm behind hers, his breath a steady rhythm against her neck. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Constance. Her mind raced with the events of the past days, with the dangers that still lay ahead, with the unexpected feelings growing for this taciturn mountain man who had risked everything for a stranger. "Silas," she whispered into the darkness. Why did you really help me?" "That day in the ghost town." He was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "When I found you, you looked like you still wanted to live, despite everything." His arms tightened fractionally around her. "I hadn't seen that kind of will in a long time. Not in myself, not in anyone." The honesty of his answer moved her deeply. "And now I remember what it's like to have something worth fighting for." The words hung in the cold night air, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Constance placed her hand over his, where it rested at her waist, their fingers intertwining as naturally as two streams joining into one river. Eventually, lulled by his steady heartbeat and the day's exhaustion, she drifted into sleep. Morning came with a bitter chill and a sky heavy with the promise of snow. They rose stiffly, bodies protesting the hard ground and cold night. Without discussion, they shared the last of their jerky and continued their journey. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they climbed higher, the air thinning perceptibly with each passing hour. Constance's breath came in labored gasps, her injured ankle throbbing in rhythm with her heart. But she pushed on, drawing strength from Silas's unwavering presence beside her. By midday, the first snowflakes began to fall, tentative at first. Then, with growing insistence, the world around them transformed, edges softened by white, sounds muffled in the crystalline air. "This could work in our favor," Silas observed, glancing up at the thickening clouds. "A snow will cover our track, make it harder for the dog, and harder for us to navigate," Constance pointed out. "True, but I know these mountains even when they're buried." He pointed ahead to a distant line of darker trees. "Trading post lies just beyond that ridge. We can make it by nightfall if we push." They trudged onward through the accumulating snow, their progress slowing with every additional inch of white powder. The cold seeped through their clothing, numbing extremities, sapping strength. Constance's world narrowed to the simple act of placing one foot before the other, following the broad shoulders of the man breaking trail ahead of her. The snow was falling heavily now, visibility reduced to mere yards. Wind howled around them, driving ice crystals against exposed skin like tiny needles. "Silas," Constance called, her voice nearly lost in the growing tempest. "I think this is becoming a blizzard." He turned back to her, face etched with concern beneath the accumulation of snow on his hat brim. "You're right. We need to find shelter until it passes." But shelter in this barren stretch between the ridge and the trading post was scarce. They pressed on, fighting against the strengthening wind, against the cold that threatened to seize their muscles and lure them into the deadly sleep of hypothermia. Just as Constance felt her strength failing, Silas's voice cut through the howling wind. "There, look!" Through the curtain of white, a dark shape materialized, a small structure, half buried in snow. As they drew closer, it revealed itself to be a trapper's line shack, abandoned but still standing. Silas forced the frozen door open, ushering Constance inside. The interior was Spartan, a crude bunk, a small iron stove, a stack of firewood left by some conscientious previous occupant. But after the fury of the storm, it seemed like a palace. "Thank God," Constance breathed, collapsing onto the bunk as Silas secured the door behind them. "Someone's looking out for us," he agreed, already kneeling to light a fire in the stove. As warmth slowly filled the tiny cabin, they shed their outer layers, hanging wet clothes near the stove to dry. Constance's fingers and toes burned painfully as circulation returned, but she welcomed the discomfort as proof of life. Silas found an old pot and filled it with snow, setting it on the stove to melt for drinking water. In one corner, miraculously, A previous occupant had left a cache of supplies, tea, beans, a small sack of flour. "We'll wait out the storm here," he declared, relief evident in his voice. "Might be a blessing in disguise. Blackwood's men will be forced to seek shelter too," Constance nodded, watching him move about the small space with efficient purpose. The fear and tension of their flight momentarily receded, replaced by a fragile sense of safety. Outside, the blizzard raged, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, two fugitives found a moment's respite, their breath mingling in the warm air of a forgotten shelter, their destinies entwined more tightly with each passing hour. The blizzard raged through the night and well into the following day, transforming the mountainside into an alien landscape of white drifts and ice-crusted trees. Inside the line shack, Silas and Constance waited, conserving their meager supplies, speaking little but drawing comfort from each other's presence. By the second morning, the storm had spent its fury, leaving behind a pristine stillness that seemed to absorb all sound. Silas opened the door cautiously, squinting against the brilliant reflection of sunlight on fresh snow. "God Almighty," he breathed, surveying the transformed world. Drifts higher than a man's head had formed against the windward side of the shack, while the lee side showed bare patches of earth where the wind had scoured away the snow. Constance joined him at the doorway, her breath clouding in the frigid air. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "and terrifying. Beautiful things with teeth." Silas echoed his earlier sentiment. "This changes our plan." "How so?" "Snow this deep. We won't make the trading post today. Maybe not tomorrow either." He frowned, calculating. "But it works both ways. Blackwood's men will be struggling too. So we wait." Silas shook his head. "Can't afford to. Your father's trial is still coming, storm or no storm." He turned to face her. "We need to build snowshoes." The next hours were spent in focused labor. Silas fashioned crude but serviceable snowshoes from flexible branches stripped from nearby pines, weaving them with twine from his pack and strips cut from an old blanket found in the shack. Constance assisted, her nimble fingers quickly learning the technique. "You're good at this," Silas observed as she finished binding the last snowshoe. "I've always been a quick study," she replied with a small smile, "though I never imagined these particular skills would prove useful to a judge's daughter from Boston." "Life has a way of surprising us," he agreed, more truth in the simple statement than he'd intended. They departed the shack near midday, packs filled with what supplies remained, the precious map secured inside Constance's coat. The snowshoes distributed their weight, allowing them to move atop the fresh powder rather than sinking into its depth. Still, progress was slow and taxing, each step requiring careful placement to maintain balance. Constance adapted to the awkward gait with surprising grace, following Silas's instructions to widen her stance and use the poles he'd fashioned from straight branches. Her ankle, though still tender, had improved during their enforced rest, allowing her to keep pace with reasonable comfort. The trading post, according to Silas, lay 5 miles west across the ridge. Under normal conditions, they might have reached it by evening. In the deep snow, with frequent pauses to check their surroundings and listen for pursuers, the journey would take considerably longer. As they climbed higher toward the ridge, the wind picked up, carrying with it the bitter cold of the alpine heights. The exertion of breaking trail kept them warm, but Silas knew the danger of sweating in such temperatures. He called regular halts, ensuring they didn't overheat and that they drank enough water to prevent the insidious onset of dehydration. "Tell me about your father," Silas said during one such rest, partly from genuine curiosity, partly to keep Constance's mind engaged and alert. She leaned against her poles, her face flushed with exertion beneath her hat. "He's a good man, principled, stubborn." A fond smile touched her lips. "Much like someone else I've come to know," Silas accepted the comparison with a slight nod. "And your mother?" "She died when I was 12. Influenza." Constance's expression turned wistful. "After that, it was just the two of us. Father raised me as both daughter and son, I suppose. Taught me to think for myself, to stand up for what's right." "He did well," Silas observed quietly. Her eyes met his, gratitude warming their green depths. "And what of your family?" Silas's gaze turned distant. "Gone. Farm in Pennsylvania. Father, mother, 2 younger brothers. "I'm sorry," he nodded once, accepting her sympathy without elaboration. Some wounds were still too raw for words, even after years. They continued their ascent, the forest thinning as they neared the ridge top. The panorama that opened before them as they crested the rise was breathtaking. Miles of snow-covered wilderness stretching to the horizon, mountains rising like white cathedrals against the azure sky. In the valley below, a thin column of smoke rose from a cluster of buildings barely visible among the trees. "The trading post," Silas confirmed, pointing to the smoke. "Old Jim's place. We'll make it by nightfall." If we push hard, the descent proved more treacherous than the climb, gravity constantly threatening to turn their controlled steps into a headlong plunge. Twice, Constance lost her balance, saved from falling only by Silas's quick reflexes. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the valley floor, where the snow lay somewhat less deep, sheltered by the surrounding peaks. The trading post gradually took shape as they approached, a main building of hewn logs with a steep roof, flanked by a stable and what appeared to be a storehouse. A faded sign hung above the door, its lettering nearly illegible beneath years of weather. "Burke's Trading Post, Est, 1857. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a beacon of warmth and civilization in the vast wilderness. As they drew closer, Silas raised a hand in caution. "Something's not right," he murmured, eyes narrowing. Constance followed his gaze. "What is it?" "No tracks. After a storm like that, Jim would have cleared a path to the stable at least." Silas scanned the buildings with growing unease. "And that smoke, it's too thin, not like his usual fire. Could he have left before the storm? Possible, but unlikely. Jim doesn't abandon his post, even in winter." Silas unslung his rifle. "Stay behind me." They approached cautiously, alert for any sign of danger. The windows of the main building were dark despite the gathering dusk, the usual lanterns unlit. The silence was complete, oppressive. At the door, Silas paused, listening. Nothing. He knocked once, firmly. No response. With deliberate care, he pushed the door open, rifle ready. The interior was dim, illuminated only by the dying embers in the hearth. The familiar smell of tobacco and leather was overlaid with something else, a metallic scent that Silas recognized immediately. "Blood." "Jim!" he called softly, stepping inside, motioning for Constance to remain at the threshold. A groan emanated from behind the trading counter. Silas moved swiftly, rounding the rough-hewn planks to find old Jim Burke sprawled on the floor, clutching his side where dark stains had spread across his woolen shirt. "Morgan," the old man croaked, recognition dawning in his pain-clouded eyes. "You shouldn't have come." Silas knelt beside him, setting his rifle aside to examine the wound. "What happened, Jim?" "Blackwood's men," Jim managed, his breathing labored. "3 of them, looking for you and a woman." He coughed, specks of blood appearing on his lips. "Didn't tell him nothing, but they didn't believe me. Shot me and left me for dead yesterday morn." Constance had entered, despite Silas's warning, and now stood pale-faced behind him. "We need to help him," she urged. Silas nodded grimly. "Constance, get water boiling. There's medical supplies in that cabinet by the door." As she hurried to comply, Silas helped Jim to a more comfortable position, using a folded blanket to elevate his head. "They took my horses," Jim continued weakly, "and said they'd be back if I was still breathing, looking for something valuable. They said, 'A map.'" Silas and Constance exchanged alarmed glances. "When did they leave?" Silas asked urgently. "Dawn yesterday, before the worst of the storm hit." Jim's gaze shifted to Constance. "This her? The one they're hunting?" "Yes," Silas confirmed. "She's in trouble, Jim. Needs to get to Denver." The old trader studied Constance for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Storm might have delayed them, but they'll be back." His hand clutched at Silas's sleeve. "You need to go, now. Not without tending to you first," Silas insisted. Together, he and Constance cleaned and bandaged Jim's wound. A bullet had grazed his side, tearing flesh but miraculously missing vital organs. The old man had lost blood and was weak, but with proper care, he would survive. As Constance prepared a broth from supplies found in the trading post's well-stocked pantry, Silas conducted a thorough inventory of what remained after Blackwood's men had ransacked the place. Ammunition, thankfully, was untouched. The looters apparently well supplied in that regard. Food staples and medical supplies were plentiful, as were winter clothing and basic tools. And the most critical loss is the horses. Silas reported, as they gathered around the now blazing hearth. "Without them, the journey to Denver will take too long." "There's another option," Jim offered, his voice stronger after food and rest. "Mule train. Due through here tomorrow or next day, weather permitting, heading for Denver with furs and mineral sample." Hope flickered in Constance's eyes. "They'd take passengers for the right price," Jim confirmed, "and Micah Holt owes me a favor or three." "So we wait," Silas concluded, not entirely comfortable with the idea, but seeing no better alternative. "You secure the place," Jim directed. "Blackwood's men could return any time. I'll rest. Save my strength to deal with Micah when he arrives." As night fell in earnest, Silas barricaded the doors and windows as best he could, establishing a defensive position that would at least give them warning if attackers approached. Constance moved about the trading post with quiet efficiency, preparing a simple meal, tending to Jim, organizing supplies they might need for the next leg of their journey. Later, as Jim slept near the fire and Silas kept watch by the window, Constance joined him, her presence a comfort in the tense silence. "We're running out of time," she said softly, voicing the fear that had been growing within her. "Even if this mule train arrives tomorrow, even if they take us to Denver, my father's trial begins in 8 days. We'll make it," Silas assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at his confidence. One way or another, she studied his profile, strong and determined in the faint light. "Why does it matter so much to you? My father's freedom, the corruption we're fighting. It's not your battle." Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered landscape beyond the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, resonant with honesty. "Maybe I'm tired of watching good people suffer while the guilty go free." He turned to face her. "Or maybe it's simpler than that." "How so?" His eyes held hers, unflinching. "Maybe I just can't bear the thought of you facing this alone." Dawn broke cold and clear, the world outside the trading post a gleaming tableau of white brilliance. Silas, who had maintained vigil through most of the night, watched the sun crest the eastern peaks with bleary eyes. No sign of Blackwood's men. The storm had either deterred them or buried them. He preferred not to speculate which. Inside, Constance tended to Jim, changing his bandages and coaxing him to drink a strengthening tea she'd brewed from the trader's own supplies. The old man was improving steadily, his natural vigor asserting itself despite the severity of his wound. "You've got healing hands, miss," Jim observed as she checked his injury. "Gentle but sure." "My mother taught me," Constance replied, a soft smile touching her lips. She believed women should know how to mend bodies as well as clothing. "Wise woman," Jim nodded approvingly. "Say, Morgan tells me you're carrying something valuable, something men are willing to kill for." Constance hesitated, glancing toward where Silas stood by the window. He gave a slight nod. Jim was trustworthy, and at this point, keeping secrets served little purpose. "A map," she explained, keeping her voice low, "to a gold mine, but more importantly, it contains evidence of corruption that could free my father from prison." Jim let out a low whistle. "That explains the determination of those bastards who shot me. They tore this place apart looking for something. Blackwood leads them," Silas added, joining the conversation. "Augustus Blackwood. Name mean anything to you?" Jim's weathered face darkened. "Blackwood Mining Company. Bought up half the claims in these mountains over the last few years. Not known for their scruples." "That's them," Constance confirmed grimly. "They framed my father when he began investigating their business practices." "Well, you've stirred up a hornet's nest. That's certain." Jim pushed himself to a more upright position with a wince. "But I've never had much love for hornets." They spent the morning fortifying the trading post as best they could, boarding broken windows, establishing clear lines of fire, preparing for the worst, while hoping for Micah Holt's mule train. Silas found a shotgun behind the counter to complement his rifle, and Constance practiced with her revolver until she could draw and aim with confident precision. "You're a natural," Silas observed, as she hit a row of cans he'd set up for target practice. "I told you my father believed in practical education," she replied, reloading with deft fingers. "Though I admit I never imagined needing these skills quite so desperately." By midday, Jim was strong enough to sit at the table, poring over the map with Silas and Constance. His knowledge of the territory proved invaluable, confirming Silas's assessments and adding details only a long-time resident would know. This notation here, Jim pointed to a series of numbers along the map's edge. That's an elevation marker. And this symbol, he indicated what appeared to be random scratches near the mine location. That's the old Apache sign for hidden water. There's a spring near that mine. Underground, most likely. You can read Apache symbols? Constance asked, impressed. Jim shrugged. Traded with them for 30 years before the army drove most out. You pick things up. His finger traced the route they would need to take. Micah's mule train will follow the main trail to Denver, here. But to reach the mine first, you'd need to divert at Serpent's Pass, travel north through Deadman's Canyon, then east to this ridge. Dangerous? Silas asked, though he already knew the answer. In winter, damn near suicidal. Jim didn't sugarcoat it, but possible, especially for someone who knows these mountains like you do. They were still discussing options when a sound outside froze them all in mid-conversation. The distant jingle of harness bell, growing steadily closer. Silas moved swiftly to the window, rifle ready. After a tense moment, his shoulders relaxed fractionally. Mule train, he confirmed. About a dozen animals, 5 men. That'll be Micah, Jim said with evident relief. And right on schedule, despite the snow. The mule train arrived in a jingling of bells and stomping of hooves, the animals' breath steaming in the cold air as they came to a halt before the trading post. The lead rider, a tall man with a silver-streaked beard and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in the high country, dismounted with the fluid grace of a lifetime horseman. Jim Burke, he called, approaching the door. "Or are you alive in there, you old reprobate?" "Alive enough," Jim replied as Silas opened the door cautiously. Though some tried to change that recently, Micah Holt entered, stamping snow from his boots, shrewd eyes taking in the barricaded windows, the wounded trader, and the armed strangers with a single glance. "Trouble?" he asked simply. "The worst kind," Jim confirmed. "These folks need passage to Denver. Urgent business." Micah studied Silas and Constance with undisguised curiosity. "That's so? Denver's a fair piece in this weather. 3 days hard travel. Minimum. We can pay," Constance offered. "Well, in Denver we can. I have funds there." The mule skinner scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Money's always welcome, but Jim's word is good enough for me. If he says you need help, that's that." He glanced back at Jim. "You coming too?" "You look like death warmed over." Jim shook his head. "Someone's got to mind the store. Besides, I'm too old to be gallivanting across mountains in winter." He fixed Micah with a serious stare. "But these two, they need to reach Denver before the 28th. Matter of life and death." "Whose death?" Micah asked pointedly. "Mine, possibly," Constance answered with disarming honesty. "And my father's, certainly, if we don't reach Denver in time for his trial." Something in her directness seemed to satisfy the mule skinner. "Fair enough. We leave at first light tomorrow. Can't push the animals any harder after the trail they've already broken today." Silas and Constance exchanged glances. Another delay, but unavoidable. "We'll be ready," Silas assured him. As Micah went to inform his men and settle the mules for the night, Jim beckoned Silas closer. "There's something else you should know," he said in a low voice. "Trail rumors. Blackwood's got men in Denver too. Hired guns watching the roads. The courthouse." Silas's expression hardened. "How many? Can't say for certain. At least half a dozen sewn from what I've heard. So even if we make it to Denver," Constance said, having overheard, "we'll still face opposition. More than opposition," Jim clarified grimly. "Assassination, most likely. Blackwood can't afford to let that evidence reach the court." The reality of their situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Even if they evaded immediate pursuit, even if they survived the dangerous winter journey, Denver itself would present yet another gauntlet to run. As darkness fell once more, the trading post filled with the mule skinners, rough men but honest, who respected Jim Burke and extended that respect to his guests. They shared a communal meal, stories flowing as freely as the coffee Jim insisted on brewing despite his weakened state. Later, as the men bedded down in the main room and stable, Silas found a quiet corner where he and Constance could speak privately. "You should know," he began without preamble, "I'm considering a change in plans." Her brow furrowed. "What kind of change?" "The mine. We still haven't confirmed the evidence is there. What if we reach Denver only to find we've nothing to present at your father's trial? You want to visit the mine first, she deduced, understanding immediately. Split from the mule train at Serpent's Pass, as Jim suggested. Silas nodded. It's risky. Would add at least a day to our journey, maybe two. But if the evidence isn't what you hope, it has to be, Constance insisted, her voice low but intense. My father was certain. Certainty doesn't make it so, Silas countered gently. I've seen too many men die chasing certainties that turned to smoke. She was quiet for a long moment, the gravity of the decision weighing on her. Finally, she nodded slowly. You're right, we need to confirm. Her green eyes met his, resolute despite the fear he could see lurking in their depths. But Silas, if we do this, if we divert to the mine, we'll be cutting our margin for error to nothing. I know, he acknowledged. One wrong step, one unexpected delay. And my father hangs, she finished, the words stark in the quiet corner. Silas reached for her hand, clasping it firmly in his own. I won't let that happen. I promise you, Constance. She studied their joined hands, her smaller one nearly disappearing in his weathered grip. Funny, she said softly. A week ago, I didn't know you existed. Now I'm trusting you with everything that matters. Life has a way of surprising us. He echoed his earlier sentiment, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. Indeed it does, she agreed, returning the faint smile. Tomorrow, then, we go to the mine. Morning brought renewed purpose and a flurry of preparation. Micah Holt, informed of their plan to temporarily separate from the mule train, was skeptical but ultimately supportive, offering 2 of his sturdier mules and provisions for the side journey. We'll slow our pace, he promised. Give you time to rejoin us before we reach Denver, but can't wait more than a day once we hit the main road. Understood, Silas agreed. Dear and thank you. Jim, looking better but still far from recovered, provided detailed instructions for navigating the treacherous path to the mine, marking key landmarks on their map with careful precision. There's an old cabin near the mine entrance, he told them, built by the original prospector, fellow named Hollister. Might still be standing, might not. But if it is, it would provide shelter. As they prepared to depart, Jim pressed something into Constance's hand, a small leather pouch containing what felt like coins. Emergency funds, he explained gruffly, enough to bribe your way past trouble if need be. I can't accept, she began, but the old trader cut her off. You can and you will. Consider it my contribution to bringing down Blackwood. Bastard shot me after all, she smiled, touched by the gesture. We'll pay you back with interest. See that you do, Jim replied with a wink, and bring me the story when it's done. That'll be interest enough. They departed with the mule train as dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold. The weather had held, the temperature rising just enough to soften the top layer of snow, making travel easier for the animals. Micah led the procession, setting a pace that balanced urgency with caution. These mountains punished haste with injury or death. Constance rode beside Silas near the middle of the column, her body adapting to the rhythm of her mule with growing confidence. The sturdy animal, accustomed to mountain travel, picked its way through the snow with sure-footed determination. How's your ankle? Silas asked, noting she no longer winced when shifting her weight. Much improved, she replied. The rest at the trading post helped. They traveled in relative silence for most of the morning, conserving energy, each lost in private thoughts about what lay ahead. Around midday, they reached Serpent's Pass, a narrow, winding trail that snaked between towering rock formations before descending into a broader valley that would eventually lead to Denver. Micah called a halt, allowing the animals to rest while the men checked harnesses and adjusted loads. He approached Silas and Constance, his expression betraying concern. This is where we part ways, then, he said, gesturing toward a barely visible trail that branched northward. That'll take you toward the mine, follows an old creek bed for the first few miles, then climbs into rougher country. Silas nodded, studying the path with a critical eye. Looks passable. For now, Micah agreed. But there's weather coming. Feel it in my bones. He glanced at the western horizon where clouds were beginning to gather. You've got maybe a day of clear travel before it hits. We'll be quick, Constance assured him, though anxiety fluttered in her chest at this new complication. We'll rejoin you before you reach the main road to Denver, Silas added. 3 days from now, by our reckoning. I'll hold the train there for 1 day, Micah promised. After that, we have to push on. He hesitated, then added gruffly, be careful up there. Mountains don't care about your reasons for coming. With that philosophical warning, he helped them transfer their supplies to their own packs, ensuring they had adequate provisions for the side journey. The other mule skinners, rough men with kind hearts, offered additional items, extra ammunition, a better compass, dried meat from their personal stores. As they prepared to leave, one of Micah's men approached, a weathered scout named Ezra, who had said little during their time together. There's something you should know, he said in a low voice, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Saw sign yesterday before we reached the trading post. Fresh tracks heading west, then north, 3 riders, moving fast despite the snow. Silas tensed. Blackwood's men, Ezra shrugged. Can't say for certain, but they weren't trappers or traders. Military-style boots, expensive horses. Could they be headed for the mine? Constance asked, alarm evident in her voice. It's possible, Silas acknowledged grimly. And if they interrogated someone who knew about it, the implication hung between them. Their path had potentially become even more dangerous. We'll keep watch, Ezra promised. If we spot them on our route, Micah will send a rider back to warn you. With this additional concern weighing on them, Silas and Constance bid farewell to the mule train and set off on the northern trail. Their mules, freed from the slower pace of the caravan, moved with renewed energy, eager to forge ahead. The path followed the creek bed as Micah had described, winding through a narrow valley flanked by steep slopes. Bare aspens lined the waterway, their silver trunks stark against the snow, branches reaching skyward like supplicants. The creek itself was mostly frozen, with occasional patches of dark water visible where the current ran too swift for ice to form. By late afternoon, the terrain began to change, the valley narrowing further, the path climbing steadily upward. The going became more difficult, requiring them to dismount and lead the mules through particularly treacherous sections. We're entering Dead Man's Canyon, Silas explained as they paused to catch their breath. Named for obvious reasons, narrow, prone to avalanches, easy place for an ambush. You're very reassuring, Constance remarked dryly, but her eyes scanned the heights with new wariness. Just being honest, we'll need to move quickly but carefully. He studied the sky, where the clouds Micah had predicted were gathering more rapidly than expected. And we need to find shelter before that storm hits. They pushed onward, the canyon walls rising ever higher around them, creating a claustrophobic passage that seemed to swallow sound. Their breath and the mules' hooves on stone were the only noises that broke the eerie silence. As dusk approached, bringing with it a precipitous drop in temperature, Silas spotted what they'd been searching for, a small cave set into the canyon wall, its entrance partially obscured by fallen rocks. It's not ideal, he said, examining the space, but it's defensible and will keep us out of the weather. They cleared the entrance enough to lead the mules inside, finding the cave extended farther back than expected, opening into a chamber large enough for both them and the animals. Ancient soot marks on the ceiling indicated they weren't the first to seek refuge here. While Constance arranged their bedrolls and prepared a small meal from their provisions, Silas constructed a rudimentary barrier near the entrance, not enough to block it completely, but sufficient to break the wind and conceal any light from their fire. Do you think Blackwood's men are ahead of us? Constance asked, as they huddled near the small flame, its wavering light casting massive shadows on the rock walls. If Ezra's tracks were theirs, it's possible, Silas admitted. But they'd be moving blind. They don't have the map. Unless they forced Jim to tell them about the mine's location before they shot him, she pointed out. Silas considered this. Jim's tougher than he looks, and even if they got something out of him, these mountains are treacherous without specific directions. They might be searching the wrong area entirely. I hope you're right. She pulled the map from inside her coat, unfolding it carefully. According to this, we should reach the mine by midday tomorrow, assuming the weather holds. And assuming we're not delayed by unwelcome company, Silas added, checking his rifle for what seemed the 100th time. Outside, the wind began to rise, moaning through the canyon with a sound like distant voices. The storm was approaching faster than anticipated, driving the temperature down further. Inside their stone shelter, Constance shivered despite the fire and her heavy coat. Silas noticed immediately. "Come here," he said, opening his arms in invitation. She moved to his side without hesitation, allowing him to wrap his coat around them both. His body was solid and warm against hers, a bulwark against the cold and the fear that threatened to overwhelm her as their journey neared its most dangerous phase. "We'll make it," he murmured into her hair, the words both promise and prayer. "I know," she replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Somewhere during their desperate flight, her trust in this man had become absolute. Whatever happened, they would face it together. Morning arrived with howling winds and driving snow. The storm had descended in full fury overnight. Silas stood at the cave entrance, assessing the conditions with a frown. "We can't travel in this," he concluded, returning to where Constance waited by the rekindled fire. "Visibility is near zero, and the trail will be treacherous." "How long will it last?" she asked, fighting to keep the desperation from her voice. Every hour delayed was an hour closer to her father's judgment. Hard to say. Mountain storms are unpredictable, could pass by noon, could last days. The possibility of days confined in the cave while precious time slipped away was almost unbearable. Constance paced the small space, mind racing for alternatives where none existed. "We have to try," she insisted finally. "Every moment we wait would be suicide." Silas cut her off firmly. "I understand your urgency, Constance, but dying in this blizzard won't help your father." She knew he was right, but the knowledge did nothing to ease her frustration. With deliberate effort, she calmed herself, focusing instead on what they could control. "Then we prepare," she said decisively. "Check our supplies, study the map, ensure we're ready to move the instant the weather breaks." Silas nodded, relieved by her practical approach. "Mom, we take turns resting. We'll need our strength." The day passed with agonizing slowness, the storm showing no signs of abating. They rationed their food carefully, unsure how long they would be trapped. The mules, at least, seemed content with the enforced rest, dozing peacefully at the back of the cave. As evening approached, bringing no change in the weather, Silas made a decision. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow, storm or no storm." "We can't afford to lose another full day," Constance agreed, though the prospect of venturing into the blizzard was daunting. They spent the evening reviewing their route, memorizing key landmarks in case visibility remained poor. "The mine entrance should be here," Silas indicated on the map, tracing a finger along a contour line, "set into the eastern face of this ridge. According to Jim, there's a distinctive rock formation above it, shaped like a hawk's head, and the cabin Hollister built should be nearby, probably within sight of the entrance, if it's still standing." They slept fitfully, taking turns keeping watch, not just for the weather, but for any sign their sanctuary had been discovered by pursuers. The night seemed endless, the storm's fury undiminished, but eventually the faintest lightning of the darkness signaled dawn's approach. True to his word, Silas began preparations to depart as soon as they could distinguish shapes in the grey light of morning. The storm had weakened somewhat overnight, the driving snow replaced by steady flakes that fell straight down in the now still air. "It's actually good timing," Silas observed as they loaded the mules. "Fresh snow will cover our tracks, make us harder to follow, but also harder to find if something goes wrong," Constance pointed out. "That's why we stay together no matter what." They set out into a transformed world, the canyon buried under fresh drifts that in some places reached the mules' chests. Progress was painfully slow, each step requiring careful consideration to avoid hidden crevices or unstable snow bridges. By mid-morning, they had covered perhaps 2 miles, less than half their usual pace. The mine, according to their calculations, lay another 3 miles ahead, a journey that would normally take a couple of hours, but might now require the remainder of the day. As they rounded a bend in the canyon, Silas suddenly raised his hand in warning, signaling for absolute silence. Constance froze, holding her mule's reins tightly to prevent any noise. Ahead, barely visible through the falling snow, dark shapes moved across the white landscape. 3 riders, their horses struggling through the deep drifts, heading in the same direction as Silas and Constance. "Blackwood's men," Silas breathed, his voice barely audible. Constance nodded, fear and determination mingling in her expression. Their worst fears confirmed. They were not alone in their quest for the mine. Silas pulled Constance back around the bend, out of sight of the riders ahead. His mind raced through their limited options. Continue forward and risk confrontation, or retreat and lose precious time they couldn't afford to waste. "They haven't seen us," he whispered, leaning close to be heard above the wind that had begun to rise again. "But they're heading straight for the mine. Is there another route?" Constance asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Silas studied the canyon walls, considering, "Not through the canyon, but we could climb above, follow the ridgeline. Riskier, especially in this weather, but it would keep us out of sight. And the mules, we'll have to leave them, hide our supplies and hope to retrieve them later." They worked quickly, securing the mules in a sheltered alcove with enough food for a day. The animals seemed almost relieved to be stopping, turning their backs to the wind and huddling together for warmth. Silas distributed the most essential supplies between their packs: ammunition, food, medical kit, and of course, the precious map. Anything that would identify them, they buried deep in the snow. The climb was brutal, steep, slick rock faces partially covered with snow that provided treacherous footing. Constance's injured ankle protested each step, but she gritted her teeth against the pain, refusing to slow their ascent. Silas went first, testing handholds, creating footholds where needed, then reaching back to help her follow. By the time they reached the ridgetop, both were gasping for breath, their clothes soaked with sweat despite the bitter cold, but they had succeeded. They were now traveling parallel to Blackwood's men, hidden from view by the ridge's contours. The going was no easier above than it had been below. The ridge undulated in a series of rises and dips, each requiring careful navigation. Wind gusts threatened to knock them off balance, while the snow concealed dangerous crevices and loose rock. They pushed on relentlessly, driven by the knowledge that each minute lost increased the chance that Blackwood's men would reach the mine first. What they would do when they got there, without the map or the code to decipher it, Silas couldn't guess, but he was certain it wouldn't be good for anyone who arrived after them. By early afternoon, according to Silas's reckoning, they should be nearing the mine's location. The ridge had begun to curve eastward, descending gradually toward a small plateau nestled between two higher peaks. "There," Silas pointed, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "That formation. It matches Jim's description. The hawk's head through the swirling snow. A massive rock outcropping jutted from the mountainside, its profile indeed resembling a raptor's head in profile, beak open as if frozen in mid-screech. Below it, nearly invisible against the white background, sat a small cabin, Hollister's place, remarkably still standing after decades of mountain winters. But something was wrong. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, thin and grey against the white sky. "Oh, someone's there," Constance observed, her hand instinctively moving to the revolver at her hip. "Blackwood's men," Silas confirmed grimly. "They've beaten us to it." They crouched behind a snow-covered boulder, studying the situation. The cabin stood approximately 300 yards away, with no cover between their position and its weather-beaten walls. No horses were visible, but a cleared area beside the structure suggested they might be sheltered on the far side. The mine entrance should be there. Silas indicated a dark shadow in the rock face about 50 yards beyond the cabin, set into the cliff. "So we have to get past them to reach it," Constance concluded, her expression hardening with determination. "Not just past them. We need to eliminate the threat. Otherwise, they'll be waiting when we emerge." The implication was clear. This would end in blood. Constance nodded once, accepting the harsh reality. "What's the plan?" Silas studied the terrain, the cabin, the mine entrance. "Weather's in our favor. Visibility is poor and the wind will mask our approach. We circle wide, come in from the east where that cluster of pines provides cover. I'll create a distraction while you make for the mine." "No," she countered immediately. "We stay together. That was the agreement. Constance, I won't leave you to face them alone," she insisted, her voice fierce despite its softness. "We've come too far together for that." Something shifted in Silas's expression. Pride mingled with a deeper emotion he wasn't ready to name. "All right," he conceded. "Together, then. But you follow my lead." Exactly. They began their approach, staying low, using every available feature of the landscape for concealment. The storm intensified as they moved, as if nature itself was conspiring to aid their stealthy advance. By the time they reached the pine cluster Silas had identified, the snow was falling so heavily that the cabin was barely visible, despite being less than 100 yards away. "Wait here," Silas whispered, easing his rifle from its oilskin cover. "I'll circle to the other side. See if I can get a count on how many we're facing." Before he could move, the cabin door swung open, a figure emerging into the storm. The man was tall, wearing an expensive fur coat that marked him as no ordinary frontiersman. He stood on the porch for a moment, scanning the white wasteland, as if expecting someone, then shouted something back into the cabin. "Blackwood himself!" Constance breathed, recognition and hatred mingling in her voice. "I'd know that arrogant stance anywhere." Two more men joined him on the porch, both armed with rifle. One gestured toward the mine entrance, clearly arguing about something. Blackwood's response was lost to the wind, but his dismissive wave spoke volumes. "They haven't found anything," Silas deduced. "They're at the mine. But without the map's code, it's useless to them, which means they'll be even more desperate to find us," Constance added. As if to confirm her assessment, one of the men pointed in their general direction. For a heart-stopping moment, Silas thought they'd been spotted, but the man was indicating the entire ridgeline, suggesting they should search a wider area. Blackwood nodded, issuing what appeared to be orders. The two men headed toward the horses, presumably to begin the search, while Blackwood himself returned to the cabin. "This is our chance," Silas said. "We take them one by one, starting with the men by the horses. Quick and quiet." They moved through the pines, circling to approach the men from behind. The snow muffled their footsteps. The wind covered any small sounds they couldn't avoid. By the time they were within striking distance, the men had already saddled two of the horses and were preparing to mount. Silas raised his rifle, taking careful aim at the nearest man. The shot, when it came, was shockingly loud despite the storm's howl. The man dropped without a sound, a neat hole punched through the back of his head. The second man spun, reaching for his weapon, but Constance was faster. Her revolver barked twice, the bullets finding their mark in his chest. He staggered back, surprise etched on his face, then collapsed beside his companion. The cabin door burst open, Blackwood emerging with a shotgun, eyes wild as he searched for the source of the gunfire. Silas stepped from cover, rifle aimed squarely at the mining magnate's chest. "Drop it!" he commanded, voice cutting through the storm like a knife. Blackwood froze, his gaze darting between Silas and Constance as she moved to stand beside her protector. Recognition dawned in his eyes when he saw her. "Miss Whitfield," he said, his cultured voice at odds with the savagery in his expression. "I thought my men had disposed of you days ago." "They tried," Constance replied coldly. "They failed." "As you have failed." "Have I?" Blackwood's laugh was bitter. "Your father hangs in 5 days. You'll never reach Denver in time, especially not in this weather." "We'll make it," she countered. "With the evidence from the mine, evidence you've been so desperate to destroy." Something calculating entered Blackwood's gaze. "The mine is empty. We've been through every inch of it. Whatever you think is there, you're mistaken. You couldn't read the map," Silas pointed out. "You were looking in the wrong places." "The map?" Blackwood's focus sharpened. "So you do have it. Hand it over, and perhaps we can come to an arrangement that benefits us all." Constance's laugh was as cold as the wind that whipped around them. "After you murdered innocent people, framed my father, left me to die, there will be no arrangement, Mr. Blackwood, only justice." "Justice!" Blackwood spat. "There's no justice in these mountains, girl. Only power and those wise enough to seize it." His fingers tightened on the shotgun. "Last chance. The map, or neither of you leaves this place alive." Silas's finger tensed on the trigger. "Your men are dead, Blackwood. You're alone." "Drop the weapon." For a long moment, The tableau held 3 figures in a swirling snowstorm, fate balanced on a knife's edge. Then Blackwood moved, swinging the shotgun toward them with surprising speed. Silas fired first, his bullet striking Blackwood's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The shotgun discharged harmlessly into the snow. Before he could recover, Constance fired twice more, her bullets finding their mark with deadly precision. Augustus Blackwood fell backward, blood blossoming on his expensive coat, his eyes, wide with disbelief, fixed on Constance as life drained from them. "You've killed me," he gasped, the words bubbling through blood-flecked lips. "No," she corrected, her voice steady as she stood over him. "You killed yourself the moment you decided that power was worth any price." They watched as the light faded from his eyes, his final breath fogging briefly in the cold air before dissipating like smoke. The mine, when they entered it, was exactly as Constance's father had described. The main shaft, visible to any casual explorer, extended only 100 feet before ending in a collapsed wall, seemingly played out, as Blackwood's mining reports had claimed. But with the map's code to guide them, they found the hidden passage, a narrow gap behind a displaced support beam that led to a second shaft angling sharply downward. There, in a chamber untouched for years, they discovered what they had risked everything to find. Not just the gold vein, still rich with ore that gleamed in the light of their lantern, but a metal strongbox bolted to the rock wall. Inside, preserved in oilskin, lay a ledger detailing years of corruption. Bribes paid, officials compromised, rival claims sabotaged or stolen outright, every transaction meticulously recorded, every name carefully noted, including those of the judges who had ensured Edward Whitfield's conviction. "This is it," Constance breathed, turning the pages with trembling fingers. "Everything we need." "Your father was thorough," Silas observed, admiration evident in his voice. "He always said evidence was sacred, that the truth would prevail if properly documented." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. And he was right. They secured the ledger and emerged from the mine to find the storm finally breaking, patches of blue sky visible between scudding clouds. By Silas's estimation, they had 3 days to reach Denver, barely enough time, but possible with the horses they'd claimed from Blackwood's men. As they prepared to depart, Constance paused at the cabin's threshold, looking back at the mine entrance, the source of so much greed, so much suffering, and now, perhaps, salvation. "What happens after?" Silas asked quietly. "When your father is free." She turned to him, studying the weathered face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "I don't know," she admitted. "I never planned beyond this moment." "Maybe you don't have to plan everything," he suggested, stepping closer. "Maybe some paths reveal themselves only as you walk them." Constance smiled, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his beard. "Like finding a half-dead woman in a ghost town." "Exactly like that," he agreed, covering her hand with his own. 3 years later, the cabin below the Hawk's Head rock stood transformed, roof repaired, walls reinforced, a small garden flourishing beside it in the summer sun. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of baking bread into the clear mountain air. Inside, Constance Morgan sat at a table, writing in a journal while her husband checked his traps by the creek. Their simple gold wedding bands caught the light as she turned a page, recording the latest developments in Denver. Her father, now fully exonerated, had been appointed to investigate other cases of corruption in the territorial courts. The Blackwood Mining Company had been dissolved, its assets seized, its conspirators imprisoned or fled. The gold mine above their cabin remained untouched, a secret kept by mutual agreement, a treasure less valuable than the life they had built together. When Silas returned, he would find her waiting, the map that had brought them together framed on their wall. No longer a path to